I didn't feel the impact at first. I heard it. A sickening, wet crunch. Like stepping on a dry branch. But infinitely louder because it was happening inside my own skull. 1 second. I was standing in the sun-drenched garden of a savanna estate. The scent of magnolias and sea salt, heavy in the air. I was holding my handwritten vows. My thumb tracing the ink where I'd promised to love Nathan until the end of time. The next second, the world tilted sideways. The force of the blow spun me around. My veil ripped from my hair. I stumbled, my heels catching on the stone patio. And I tasted copper, blood. It wasn't a trickle. It was a gush. Hot and metallic. Flooding my mouth and dripping down my chin. I looked down. A bright, violent splash of crimson was blooming across the bodice of my custom ivory gown. It looked like a map of a war zone. I looked up. Standing 2 feet away was my brother, Brandon. His fist was still clenched. He wasn't horrified. He wasn't apologetic. He was smiling. It was a small, smug curl of the lip. The look of a man who had just put a piece of furniture back in its proper place. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was a physical weight. It sucked the air out of the garden. No birds sang. No wind rustled the Spanish moss. The string quartet had frozen. Boughs hovering over strings. Somewhere to my left, a crystal champagne flute slipped from a guest's hand and shattered on the stone. The crash sounded like a gunshot in a library. I stood there, swaying, my hand coming up to touch my throbbing cheekbone. My fingers came away wet and red. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. In that deafening silence, my training kicked in. I am a risk analyst for the Department of Homeland Security. I don't panic, I assess. I scan for threats. I calculate probabilities. I scanned the faces of the 300 guests. Savannah's elite. Police commissioners. Judges. Old money families, who prided themselves on decorum above all else. They were frozen. Their eyes weren't on me. The bride bleeding at the altar, their eyes were darting nervously away. Or worse, looking at me with a mixture of pity and revulsion. Why weren't they moving? Why wasn't anyone rushing to help? Then, I saw my mother. Patricia was moving. She was walking briskly across the grass, her silk dress rustling. For a split second, a foolish, childish second, I thought she was coming to me. I thought, finally, she's going to be a mother. She walked right past me. She didn't even glance at the blood on my dress. She went straight to Brandon. She reached out and gently touched his arm. The arm he had just used to assault me. Her voice was a hiss. But in the vacuum of the garden, it carried like a scream. Brandon, calm down, she whispered, soothing him like he was a toddler who had scraped his knee. People are watching. The optics. Brandon, think of the optics. The optics. She wasn't worried about my broken jaw. She was worried about the scene. She was worried about how this would look on the society pages. My gaze shifted to my father. Gregory. He stood near the floral arch. His face a mask of cold disappointment. He wasn't looking at Brandon with anger. He was looking at me. And his eyes said it all. Why do you always have to be so difficult? Why did you make him do this? You're unstable. The realization hit me harder than the punch. The guests weren't paralyzed by shock. They were paralyzed by context. They had been prepped for this. For months, Gregory and Patricia had been running a whisper campaign. I knew it. I could see it in the way the guests shifted their feet. They had been told that poor Bella was fragile, that Bella was having episodes, that Bella was unstable and prone to hysterics. They didn't see a victim. They saw a self-fulfilling prophecy. They saw exactly what my father had told them they would see. A chaotic, broken woman ruining a perfect day. The normalization of cruelty is a terrifying thing. It doesn't happen overnight. It happens in increments. It starts with a skipped birthday. Then, a a forgotten graduation, then a joke about your weight, then a demand for money. It's a slow drip poison that convinces you that you deserve the pain, that you are the problem. My family had spent 27 years calibrating my reality, until I believed that being punched at my own wedding was somehow a failure on my part. My mother was still fussing over Brandon's suit jacket, straightening his lapel. "It's okay," she cooed. "We'll fix this. We'll tell everyone she tripped. Just smile." Darling. I looked at the blood on my hand. I looked at the man I was supposed to marry. Nathan, who was standing very, very still. And for the first time in my life, the fog cleared. I wasn't their daughter. I was their collateral damage. I was the friction they needed to polish their golden sun. And I was done being the grit in their machine. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. Tears are a currency my family doesn't accept. And I stopped trying to pay with them a long time ago. Instead, my mind went cold. It went back to the fortress. The fortress wasn't a place. It was a state of mind I built when I was 17. It started the day I got into Georgetown on a full scholarship. And Brandon poured a liter of cranberry juice over my acceptance letter because he was jealous of the font. My parents laughed. They framed the stained letter as a funny memory and hung it in the laundry room. That day, I learned to build walls. I realized that if I wanted to survive, I had to disappear. Not physically, but strategically. I had to become boring. I had to become gray. So, I did. To my family, I was Bella, the data entry clerk. I told them I worked in a cubicle, filing paperwork for an insurance company. I wore beige cardigans. I drove a 10-year-old sedan. I nodded when they talked about Brandon's heroic work as a police lieutenant. Even though I knew he spent half his shift napping in his patrol car, they didn't know the truth. They didn't know that data entry was a cover. They didn't know I was a Tier 1 risk analyst for Homeland Security. They didn't know I specialized in forensic auditing and digital threat assessment. They didn't know I spoke 3 languages. They didn't know I had a security clearance higher than the police commissioner my father used to play golf with. And they certainly didn't know about Fortress Data Solutions, the private cybersecurity consulting firm I ran on the weekends, while they were buying Brandon new trucks and paying off his gambling debts. I was building an empire in the dark. I invested. I bought property under an LLC. I built a portfolio worth millions, all while living in a studio apartment that smelled like old books and patience. I became a ghost in my own life. And then I met Nathan. He was the only crack in the fortress. He was a senior military lawyer, a man who dealt in facts and absolute truths. He didn't see the beige cardigan. He saw the mind underneath. He saw the way I scanned a room. He saw the way I calculated risk. On our second date, he looked at me and said, "You're hiding, aren't you? You're the smartest person in every room you walk into. But you play dumb." "Why?" I told him the truth. "Because if my family knows I have power, they'll try to take it. Or worse, they'll try to give it to Brandon." Nathan didn't laugh. He didn't tell me I was paranoid. He just nodded. "Then we keep the fortress locked," he said, "until it's time to open fire." And I had kept it locked. Until 3 months ago. That was when the requests started. Not requests. Demands. Brandon had gotten into trouble. Again. Gambling debts. A loan shark in Atlanta who didn't care about his badge. $45,000. My father had called me into his study. He didn't ask if I had the money. He just handed me a pen. "Sign this loan application," he said. "It's in your name. We need to help your brother." I signed. But I didn't submit the application to a bank. I bought the debt myself. I used my shell company to purchase the loan note from the shark. I became my brother's creditor. I became the owner of his mistakes. And I filed the paperwork away in a folder labeled insurance. They thought I was their safety net. They didn't realize I was the one holding the scissors. The barbecue was a masterclass in performative normalcy. My father, Gregory, manned the grill, flipping steaks that cost more than my first car. Playing the benevolent patriarch, Brandon sat in the best chair, nursing a beer, looking like a king holding court. They had summoned us. A mandatory family dinner 1 week before the wedding to get to know Nathan properly. In reality, it was an interrogation. So, Nathan, Gregory said, pointing a pair of tongs at my fiancé. You're a JAG lawyer, right? Military court? Yes. Ter. Nathan said calmly. Gregory chuckled. A sound like gravel in a blender. Paper pushers. No offense. I didn't song. But in my day, men solved problems on the street. Like Brandon here. He's out there every night. Keeping Savannah safe. Real police work. Not filing briefs. Brandon smirked. Dad. Don't be mean. Someone has to file the paperwork after the real men kick down the doors. I watched Nathan. He didn't blink. He didn't mention that before law school. He was special forces. He didn't mention he had seen more combat in a month than Brandon had seen in his entire career of writing traffic tickets and shaking down local businesses. Nathan just smiled. The smile of a wolf watching a poodle bark. Paperwork can be very dangerous in the right hands. Sir. They didn't catch it. They were too busy admiring their own reflections to notice the threat sitting at their picnic table. Then came the pincer move. Bella. Help me in the kitchen. My mother called out. It wasn't a request. I followed Patricia inside. The moment the sliding glass door clicked shut, the warmth vanished from her face. She turned on the faucet to create a noise barrier. Standard operating procedure. We have a problem, she said, cutting straight to the chase. Brandon is in a bit of a bind. A misunderstanding with some investments. He needs a bridge loan. How much? I asked. I kept my voice flat. Bored. 45,000. She whispered. He bought a new truck. And the payments got mixed up with other things. We need you to cover it. Just until the wedding is over. We can't have creditors calling the house during the festivities. The lie was so lazy it was almost insulting. A truck? No. It was the gambling debt. The same debt I had purchased 3 months ago. The debt I currently held the title to. She was asking me to pay off a loan that I effectively owned. She wanted me to write a check that would cycle right back into my own shell company. Erasing Brandon's liability while draining my bank account. That's a lot of money. Mom, I said, you have it. She snapped. We know you save every penny. You live like a pauper. What are you saving for? A rainy day? Well, it's raining on your brother. She grabbed my wrist. Her nails dug in. Do this. Bella. Prove you're part of this family. If you don't, well, Gregory is already on the fence about walking you down the aisle. Don't give him a reason to stay seated. A threat. Pay up. Or be humiliated publicly. The old Bella would have argued. The old Bella would have cried about fairness. The new Bella, the one who ran Fortress Data Solutions, just did the math. If I refused now, they would cause a scene before the wedding. They would cancel the vendors. They would ruin the stage I had set for their execution. I needed them compliant. I needed them arrogant. I needed them to walk into that garden feeling untouchable. I looked at my mother. I didn't pull my hand away. I'll handle it, I said. Relief washed over her face, followed immediately by contempt. She thought I had folded. She thought I was the same weak, desperate girl she could bully. Good girl, she said, patting my cheek. I knew you'd be sensible. I walked back outside. I sat next to Nathan and took a sip of iced tea. Everything okay? He asked quietly. Perfect, I said. They took the bait. The silence didn't last forever. It broke with the sound of a notification. It came from Brandon's pocket. Then another. He looked down at his phone. Then back at me. His face twisting from smug satisfaction into raw, panicked fury. He had just received the alert. The alert I had scheduled for exactly 2 o'clock. Transfer denied. Insufficient funds. Account frozen, he realized, in that split second, that the check I had promised the bridge loan to save his reputation was a ghost. I hadn't transferred $45,000. I had flagged the transaction as fraudulent activity on an account I legally monitored. You bitch. N hissed. Forgetting the crowd. Forgetting the ceremony. You froze it. You cut me off. He raised his hand again. Instinct driving him to strike the problem until it went away. That was when the static broke. That's enough. It wasn't a shout. It was a statement of fact. Delivered with the low, resonant frequency of a closing cell door. Nathan stepped between us. He didn't shove Brandon. He didn't throw a punch. He didn't engage in the messy, emotional brawl my family thrived on. He simply occupied the space where my brother's aggression wanted to be. Nathan is 6'2", built like a fortress. But in that moment, he looked like a mountain. Brandon blinked, his hand hovering in mid-air. He looked at Nathan, his future brother-in-law, the man he had mocked as a paper pusher all week, and sneered. Move. Aga. Brandon spat. This is family business. She needs to be taught a lesson. My father, Gregory, rushed forward from the sidelines. He wasn't running to check on his bleeding daughter. He was running to contain the PR disaster. Nathan. Step back. Gregory commanded, using his old police chief voice. Brandon is just upset. Bella is. She's having one of her episodes. She provoked him. We'll handle this inside. She provoked him. We'll handle this inside. The old code. The code of silence that had protected Brandon since we were children. Take it inside. Hide the bruises. Fix the optics. Nathan didn't move. He didn't even look at Gregory. His eyes were locked on Brandon's face, dissecting him. You are mistaken, Nathan said. His voice was terrifyingly calm. It carried to the back row, where the Savannah police commissioner sat with his mouth slightly open. This is not a family dispute, and we are not going inside. Nathan reached into his jacket pocket. He didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out a badge wallet. He flipped it open. It wasn't a military ID. It was his credentials as a senior legal advisor to the Department of Defense, with special jurisdiction in Joint Task Force operations. At 1402 hours, Nathan stated, checking his watch. You struck a federal employee in the execution of an entrapment operation. That changes the jurisdiction. Lieutenant. Brandon laughed. It was a nervous, wet sound. Federal employee? She enters data for an insurance company. Get out of my face before I arrest you for obstruction. Wrong. I said. I spoke through the blood in my mouth. I stepped out from behind Nathan's shoulder. I saw the confusion ripple through the crowd. They were waiting for me to cry. They were waiting for me to run away. Instead, I wiped my chin with the back of my hand and stared directly at the police commissioner in the third row. I am a Tier 1 risk analyst for the Department of Homeland Security, I announced. My voice was steady. My clearance level is top secret, and for the past 6 months, I have been conducting a sanctioned audit of a money laundering ring operating within the Savannah Police Department. The air left the garden. Brandon's face went gray. The arrogance drained out of him like water from a cracked vase. What? He whispered. I didn't just buy your debt. Brandon, I said, locking eyes with him. I traced it. I know where the money came from. I know about the payoffs. I know about the protection racket you've been running to cover your gambling losses. Gregory turned purple. Bella, stop this nonsense immediately. You are mentally unwell. Commissioner, I apologize. My daughter is. Gregory, shut up, the commissioner said. He stood up slowly, his face grim. He wasn't looking at my father with friendship anymore. He was looking at him like a liability. Nathan took a step toward Brandon. The predator was now the prey. You have two choices. Lieutenant, Nathan said. You can continue to make a scene, in which case I will authorize the federal marshals waiting at the perimeter to breach the gate. Or, you can submit to custody right here. Brandon looked around wildly. He looked at his mother, who was clutching her pearls, pale as a sheet. He looked at his father, who was frozen in impotence. He looked at the guests, his colleagues, his drinking buddies, and saw only walls. You can't do this. Brandon stammered. I'm a cop. I'm your brother. You are a suspect. Nathan corrected. Then, Nathan delivered the line we had rehearsed. The line that signaled the end of the Juarez dynasty. Lieutenant Brandon Juarez. Nathan said, his voice dropping an octave, turning into pure command. Face the wall. Face the wall. The command didn't just hang in the air, it suffocated it. Brandon froze. His mouth opened, then closed. He looked at Nathan, waiting for the punchline. Waiting for the moment where this whole nightmare dissolved into a joke he could laugh off. But Nathan didn't blink. He stood with his feet shoulder-width apart, his hand resting casually near his badge, radiating an authority that made the air feel thin. Did you hear me? Lieutenant? Nathan asked softly. Face the wall. Slowly. Painfully. Brandon turned. He placed his hands on the ivy-covered brick wall of the garden estate. His shoulders slumped. The arrogance that had defined him for 29 years evaporated, leaving behind a man who looked small and terrified. The guests watched in stunned silence. The police commissioner was already on his phone, barking orders into the receiver. I could hear snippets of his conversation, internal affairs. Suspension. Immediate custody. I walked over to the table where the wedding cake sat, untouched. I picked up a silver serving knife. The metal was cool against my skin. I turned back to the crowd, to the people who had watched me bleed and done nothing, to the people who had whispered about my instability. My father told you I was crazy, I said, my voice carrying across the garden. He told you I was fragile. He told you I needed to be managed. I looked at Gregory. He was leaning against a pillar, his face ashen, looking like he had aged 10 years and 10 minutes. But here's the truth. I continued. I'm not fragile. I'm efficient. I pulled a flash drive from the hidden pocket of my wedding dress. I held it up. This drive contains every email, every text message, every bank transfer, and every forged signature Brandon has made in the last 5 years. I said, it contains audio recordings of him admitting to the protection racket. It contains video of him taking bribes. I looked at Brandon's back, and it contains the metadata proving that my father, Gregory Juarez, used his old police contacts to bury 3 separate internal investigations into his son's conduct. Gregory made a choking sound. Patricia let out a sob, covering her mouth with her hand. You didn't just enable him, I said to my parents. You built him. You built a monster because you needed a hero, and you used me as the foundation. I walked over to the police commissioner and handed him the drive. It's all there, I said, including the loan application he forged in my name. The commissioner took the drive. He looked at me with a mixture of awe and fear. Thank you, Ms. Juarez. We'll take it from here. 2 federal marshals stepped out from the shadows of the garden gate. They weren't there for the wedding. They were there for the takedown. They moved toward Brandon, handcuffs glinting in the sun. As they cuffed him, Brandon looked back at me. His eyes were wide, pleading. Bella, he whispered. Please, I'm your brother. I looked at him. I looked at the brother who had spilled cranberry juice on my dreams. The brother who had mocked my service. The brother who had punched me in the face on my wedding day. No, I said. You're a security risk, and I just neutralized you. I turned to Nathan. He was watching me, a small, proud smile playing on his lips. He offered me his arm. Ready to go? He asked. More than anything, I said. We walked out of the garden, past the frozen guests, past my sobbing mother and broken father, past the brother being led away in chains. We didn't look back. Not once. As we walked to the car, a thought shivered through me. What if I hadn't met him? What if I had stayed in the fortress alone? I would have survived. I know that. I would have found a way to endure. But I would have been a ghost in my own life, haunting the edges of their happiness. Nathan didn't save me. I saved myself. But he stood witness. He stood watch. And in a world that had spent 27 years telling me I was invisible, he made sure I was seen. That difference, the difference between surviving and living, was everything. We got into his car. I rested my head against the seat and closed my eyes. Where to? Nathan asked. Anywhere. I said, just drive. The wedding dress never made it to the cleaners. I left it on the floor of the hotel suite. A pile of expensive lace and bad memories. That night, back in our quiet apartment, I sat at the kitchen island with a notepad. I wrote a letter to Gregory and Patricia. I detailed every slight since I was 10 years old. I wrote about the cranberry juice. I wrote about the loneliness. I wrote about the silence. Then, I took a lighter and set the corner of the page on fire. I watched it burn over the sink, the words curling into black flakes and washing down the drain. It didn't take long for their world to follow suit. People often ask why families like mine collapse so completely when they lose control. It's simple. They mistake leverage for love and money for character. Gregory and Patricia thought they were pillars of the Savannah community. In reality, they were just tenants in a tower built on my credit score and my silence. Once I evicted them, gravity did the rest. They lost the house. They lost the status. Without the hero-son narrative to prop them up. They were just two bitter people in a small apartment, wondering where their ATM went. 1 year later, the sound of police sirens and courtroom gavels is gone, replaced by the deep, rhythmic roar of the Pacific Ocean. Nathan and I bought a small house on the Oregon coast. No uniforms here, just thick sweaters, hot coffee, and the salt air. I received an email yesterday from a young female officer in Brandon's old precinct. She told me that because I spoke up, she finally filed a report against him for harassment. And then, another woman came forward. And another. My silence had been a wall. My voice became a door. I walked down to the water's edge this morning. I looked out at the gray horizon and felt a lightness in my chest that used to terrify me. To anyone watching this who feels like the alien in their own home, who feels like they are bleeding out while their family worries about the rug, you do not owe them your survival. Blood is biology. Family is safety. If they hurt you, if they use you, if they erase you, you have the right to walk away. You have the right to burn the letter. I am not a victim. I am not a weapon. I am simply free. If Bella's story gave you hope today, hit that like button. Subscribe for more stories about finding strength in quiet places. And share this with someone who needs a reminder that they can win their own war.